If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, Transmigration, Manga, and a Girl. In May, Tokyo felt like a giant steam bath, the afternoon sun turning the pavement into shimmering waves. During lunch break, groups of students huddled together in their classrooms, excitedly discussing the latest anime and manga. Did you guys read the newest issue of Aqua's Shadow? The protagonist is insanely handsome. Yeah, but that is mostly because the artist, Ban Kazuto, has incredible drawing skills. The story is just okay. If we are talking about art style, Hayama Riku is still my favorite. He used to struggle a lot and his plotting was terrible. But his collaboration with Aizawa Yuki on Earth Core Chronicles was amazing. Rei Kirishima listened to his classmates chatting about the newest issue of Weekly Monogatari, one of Japan's best-selling manga magazines. But their excitement did not move him at all. As one of the top 10 weekly manga magazines in the country, Weekly Monogatari sold more than 10 million copies every week. Most series published in it eventually received anime adaptations, novels, stage plays or even film versions. However, to Rei, who remembered masterpieces from his previous life, these stories felt bland and uninspiring. They were not bad enough to hate, yet not good enough to enjoy. After consuming countless exceptional works, his standards were far higher than those of ordinary fans. Rei slung his backpack over his shoulder and headed up to the rooftop of the first-year building. He was not planning anything dramatic. It was simply too disruptive to draw manga inside the classroom. The constant sound of his pen and paper would be distracting for everyone. He did not care if his classmates knew he drew manga. But if one of them reported him to the homeroom teacher, that would be a headache he did not want. From his backpack, Rei took out the nearly finished draft of his manga. 5 centimeters per second. Rei had died suddenly from overwork in his previous life. The good news was that he had transmigrated. The bad news was that his memories were returning slowly, piece by piece. At first, he thought transmigration would be easy. He had been a hardcore anime fan before, so his idea was simple. Recreate classics like Dragon Ball, Naruto, Yu-Gi-Oh! Work hard for 3 years and live comfortably for the rest of his life. Reality was not so kind. He remembered that those famous titles existed but could not recall their full stories. Only scattered fragments remained. He remembered Dragon Ball as a tale about a monkey-like boy searching for glowing orbs. He remembered One Piece as the journey of a boy who wanted to become the Pirate King. But the meaning behind these goals was gone. Why chase the orbs? Why become the Pirate King? He could not remember. He had no way to reconstruct a complete story out of broken memories. Still, his mind was slowly recovering. Rei looked at the draft of 5 centimeters per second in his hands. He would not have dreamt so vividly of watching that movie a month ago, sobbing uncontrollably as if he were reliving it, if his memories were not coming back. In this world, Rei's parents had died in a car accident a few months earlier. Yet Rei wasn't homeless. Rei's parents had left him a small, old 3-room apartment on the outskirts of Tokyo, worth about 100 million yen. However, because the accident had been severe and their insurance coverage was minimal, his father had left behind more than 200 million yen in debt. For now, Rei was living in the apartment, but he had no idea when the court would issue a ruling that might force him out. His parents' savings were frozen, and his daily expenses came from the 10 to 20,000 yen the original Rei had saved over the years from pocket money and New Year's gifts. He had always been frugal, but even this would not last long. It was a brutal beginning. If not for that, Rei would not have rushed to draw a manga and prepare it for submission as soon as he remembered the plot of 5 centimeters per second last month. Reality did not allow him the luxury of living like an ordinary high school student. Rei let out a quiet sigh. He picked up his pens and tools, arranged them neatly on the rooftop table and began working on the final pages of his manga. When he found this rooftop last month, a set of abandoned desks and chairs happened to be here. It was as if someone had prepared a private studio for him. It was peaceful here. No noise. No interruptions. 5 centimeters per second, the debut film of Makoto Shinkai, one of the most beloved animation directors of his previous life, had originally been adapted from a 3-part manga, Cherry Blossom, Astronauts, and 5 centimeters per second. Although it was not Shinkai's most famous or profitable work, Rei had always felt a deep connection to it. It was not Your Name that stayed etched in his heart. It was this quiet, gentle, painful story that he rewatched every year. In his previous life, Rei had been a struggling manga artist and illustrator. With limited tools now, drawing entirely by hand had been difficult at first. But after 2 months in this world, he had slowly adapted. In this version of Japan, the internet was only beginning to rise, but print manga magazines were thriving more than ever. The animation industry was booming, and the status and income of popular manga artists were unbelievably high. In Rei's past life, even the most successful weekly manga magazine in Japan, Weekly Jump, had peaked at around 6 million copies per issue during the height of Dragon Ball. Here, the industry's peak could easily surpass 20 million copies, and the trend was still climbing. Television stations broadcast anime adaptations every afternoon. On the streets of Tokyo, retro electronic music played softly from cafes, mixing a sense of nostalgia with the city's fast-paced energy. The number of teenagers was also reaching a historical peak. If nothing unexpected happened, the next decade would be the golden age of anime. Despite these thoughts, Rei continued drawing swiftly. His hands did not slow for even a moment. After regaining the memories of 5 centimeters per second, Rei noticed something strange. His mind felt far sharper than it had in his past life. Perhaps it was the fusion of 2 souls. His concentration was extraordinary. He could picture scenes vividly just by closing his eyes. He could rotate the angles, shift the lighting, even adjust the mood of the shot as if editing a mental movie. It was as if his brain had a processor and graphics card far more powerful than the average person. Once he recalled the plot, everything came together effortlessly. Storyboards, panel composition, character expressions, background layout, line dialogue. All of it assembled naturally in his mind before he even touched the page. Because of this, he barely needed to draft storyboards. His drawing speed was extremely fast and his error rate was surprisingly low. The only reason it still took him a full month to complete the 100-page manga adaptation of 5 centimeters per second was because he had spent most of his time adjusting to the feel of hand-drawn work in this new world. Rei's lunch break passed in a flash as he continued drawing. Even though the rooftop had a bit of shade under the overhanging eaves, sweat still gathered at the back of his neck. A small breeze drifted across the rooftop, carrying a cool touch that eased the heat down his spine. Here. Wipe your sweat. It would be a shame if a drop fell on your original pages. Ah, thank you. Rei reached out absent-mindedly, took the tissue, and wiped his neck and nose. Then he froze. Wait, who are you? He was certain he had been alone on the rooftop. So who had just handed him a tissue? Rei turned his head. A girl stood beside him, strands of her hair fluttering gently in the breeze. She had delicate features, calm eyes that reflected the sunlight and a faint smile on her lips. Her gaze lingered on Rei and the manga pages spread in front of him. You are Miyuki Shiro from Class 1? Rei asked. You actually know me? Rei Kirishima. Miyu replied, surprised. Of course I know you. You're pretty well known in our year. But wait, how do you know my name? Oh, I saw you drawing up here last month, Miyu said lightly. I got curious and looked into it afterward. She stretched her arms a little, closed her eyes and let the rooftop breeze brush against her face before turning her attention back to his manuscript. The title on the first page read 5 centimeters per second. I don't remember seeing you up here last month. Rei murmured. You were completely absorbed in your drawing. I stood behind you for half an hour and you never noticed, Miyu laughed softly. And 2 weeks ago. And last week. And 3 days ago. And today. I watched you 5 times in total, and not once did you notice me. Miyu tilted her head playfully. Your concentration is incredible. If I hadn't seen your sweat about to fall onto the page, I probably wouldn't have said anything today. Rei stiffened slightly. A hint of unease flickered through him. Thankfully, he hadn't muttered anything strange during his drawing sessions that would expose him as someone from another world. Is this stalking? Stalking? Miyu repeated with a soft smile, her expression gentle. Rei, that sounds harsh. Why do you think a set of desks and chairs ended up on this rooftop? Did they fall from the sky? She opened her school bag and pulled out a stack of blank manga paper and several professional-grade pens. This school has more than 4,000 students. Do you really think you are the only one who wants to draw manga? And the only one who thinks the rooftop is the perfect place to do it during lunch break? Before you came here last month, I was the one sitting in these chairs drawing. She let out a small sigh, though her tone remained friendly. I am not angry. I just wanted to tell you the truth. Rei blinked, stunned at first. After thinking for a moment, his expression turned slightly awkward. Sorry. You could have told me earlier. Well, Mayu said with a tiny smile, when I saw someone else drawing manga at school, and doing it so seriously, I didn't want to bother them. I know how much I hate being interrupted while drawing. Besides, I thought maybe you were just using the rooftop once or twice. Rei finally understood. Last month, he had unknowingly taken over someone else's drawing spot. Mayu probably thought he would lose interest and not come back. But he kept coming. A week later, he was still there. 2 weeks later, still there. Even today, still there. Mayu stepped forward and held out her hand. Anyway, let's officially introduce ourselves. I'm Miyuki Shiro. I am a professional manga artist, and also a part-time high school student. Chapter 2, Proposal and the Sakura Iro Weekly. A professional manga artist, part-time high school student. Rei stared at Mayu's outstretched hand, unsure what expression he should be making. But since she clearly did not mind his reaction, he gently reached out and shook her hand. Rei Kirishima. But Mayu, you said you're a professional manga artist. You mean? Rei hesitated. You actually have work serialized in a magazine. You catch on quickly. A soft, modest smile appeared on Mayu's face, as if she had been waiting for him to reach that conclusion. I debuted in Sakura Iro Weekly when I was 13. So far, I have published 2 short works and 1 mid-length series. The manga I am currently serializing in Sakura Iro Weekly, which is ranked 3rd in popularity, is titled Lament. Lament? Although he knew of Sakura Iro Weekly, it was not one of the famous giant magazines. In this world, the Japanese manga market was massive. There were 6 major publishing groups that each produced a weekly magazine selling over 10 million copies nationwide. But aside from these giants, there were countless second-tier, third-tier and even fourth-tier magazines with circulations ranging from tens of thousands to several hundred thousand. Sakura Iro Weekly was a well-known regional magazine under the Hojimori Publishing Group, which also owned one of the 6 major flagship magazines. Of course, it was nowhere near the level of the flagship magazine compared to his previous life publishing houses. It was a third-tier magazine where signed artists who were not yet ready for prime serialization could publish their work. That might sound unimpressive. But in reality, getting serialized even in a small or mid-level magazine already placed someone far above ordinary hobbyist artists. Just like how a national soccer team could still effortlessly defeat a casual player, no matter how people complained about it. And considering Mayu's age, 15 years old, with 3 serialized works, she could only be described as a prodigy. Even legendary creators like Oda and Kishimoto had not achieved anything like that at her age. Oh. That's really impressive, Rei admitted. Mayu's eyes narrowed slightly. She could tell immediately that Rei did not genuinely recognize Lament. He only knew the name Sakura Iro Weekly. It made sense. Sakura Iro Weekly had a circulation of only a few 100,000, and its main audience was shoujo readers. There was no reason for an average first-year boy who preferred mainstream series to have read it. It was reasonable, it was normal. And yet, she felt a small sting of disappointment. No one at school knew she was a published manga artist. She could not bring herself to talk about her work with ordinary readers who knew nothing about the struggles of creation, yet freely criticized art and story as if it were nothing. Today, she had opened up, revealing her secret to Rei because he was clearly not the type to treat manga lightly. He was serious, skilled, and dedicated. And yet, he did not know her work. Suppressing that little ache in her chest, Mayu suddenly had an idea. 5 centimeters per second, a romance manga, Rei already had more than 100 pages done. Maybe. Rei, your manga, it looks like you have a lot of pages already, she said. Yes. Over 100. At this pace, I should finish in 2 or 3 days, Rei answered. Have you thought about submitting it for publication? Mayu asked with a gentle smile. Of course I have. Rei exhaled. I'm not even aiming for the big 6 magazines. They won't take a newcomer like me. But the smaller magazines. He scratched his cheek. I honestly have no idea which one to choose. People often believed newcomers suddenly appeared in big national magazines like Weekly Monogatari, but Rei knew better. Those so-called complete newcomers were rarely real beginners. Most had debuted under different pen names years earlier, won newcomer contests, published short works in small magazines and built up connections with editors before finally getting a chance to serialize under a new name in a top magazine. Even Oda, who began One Piece at 22, had already won second place in the Daisuka Award at 17. He spent the next 5 years drawing short pieces, improving his craft and earning recognition. No one simply created a masterpiece out of nowhere. It was the same in this world. No matter how good Rei's manuscript was, the odds were against a true unknown. Editors might not even bother opening a submission from someone without a track record. And even if they read it, the editorial board would likely reject it during the serialization meeting. If Rei wanted to reach the top 6 magazines someday, he first needed to build experience and reputation by publishing in second, third, or even fourth-tier magazines. He needed industry connections before he had any realistic chance of getting into a flagship publication. So if the big 6 were off the table, Rei's realistic options were the hundreds of lower-tier magazines scattered across the market. But Rei had a problem. He knew none of the editors. He was a student, so visiting different editorial offices in person was troublesome. And waiting weeks for rejection letters would waste precious time. He had been stuck on this decision for days. "How about this?" Mayu said with a gentle smile. "Why not send your manuscript to my editor? Maybe you could serialize it in Sakura Iro Weekly like me." Sakura Iro Weekly, isn't that a shoujo magazine?" Rei said, freezing. "That's a stereotype. Who decided that Sakura Iro Weekly is exclusively for shoujo?" Mayu laughed. "It is more accurate to call it a romance magazine. It also publishes a lot of youth romance stories." She glanced at his manuscript. "From what I have seen, 5 centimeters per second is a romance story, isn't it?" "Well, yes." Rei nodded. "And your male lead is drawn attractively." "The heroine too, she's very cute," Mayu added. "Yes, that's true," Rei agreed. "In that case, there is no reason not to submit it to Sakura Iro Weekly." Rei paused. He genuinely could not find a good argument against it. "But most of the popular works in Sakura Iro Weekly are bright and gentle romance stories," Rei said. "As for 5 centimeters per second, do either of the protagonists die?" Mayu asked. "No, it is just, the ending is bittersweet." "Then it's not a tragedy. Romance stories often have bittersweet parts. Show me one romance manga without even a hint of regret." Rei internally groaned. "I can hardly think of one that's all regret and not cheerful at all." "It's only a try," Mayu said lightly. "They might not accept it anyway. You don't need to stress." Of course, Mayu had another motive. A very simple one. Rei had claimed not to recognize her work, lament. But if Rei submitted to Sakura Iro Weekly and got serialized, he would end up reading the magazine every week. He would come across her series eventually. He would see her ranking well, maybe even above him. And he would realize just how skilled she really was. And if Rei's submission did not get accepted, he would respect her even more as a fellow manga artist. After all her polite explanations, Mayu's real intention was quite small and quite human. The gentle vanity of a young manga artist showing off in front of a peer. Rei looked into Mayu's clear, expectant eyes. After thinking for a moment, he nodded with hesitation. She was right. It was not as if he would lose anything by trying. Although he felt a little uneasy accepting help from a classmate he had only just met, Rei did not sense any hidden intentions from her. Maybe she was simply happy to find someone at school who also loved drawing manga. "All right then, Mayu. Could you give me and your editor a bit of guidance?" "Of course. You're my classmate, after all. I'll help you." Mayu's eyes curved into cheerful crescents as she smiled. "Then you should hurry and finish your manuscript. Several short series in Sakura Iro Weekly are ending in the next 2 weeks, so a few slots will open up. Do your best." She raised her fist encouragingly. "Oh, okay." Rei raised his fist back, slightly flustered. Just then, the afternoon bell rang. Mayu quickly packed her tools and headed toward the classroom. "It's decided then. I'll call my editor tonight and let them know." Rei stood on the rooftop for a moment before finally gathering his things. He tended to overthink decisions, but since Mayu had made one for him, he no longer needed to hesitate. "Sakura Iro Weekly, hey." Rei murmured. That afternoon, classes ended like normal. Rei went home alone. Lunch breaks were only for saving time, the real drawing always happened at night. Tonight, Rei felt unusually clear-headed. His focus was razor-sharp. By the time he reached the final scene of 5 centimeters per second, he completed the page in a single breath. When he finally leaned back and blinked, he saw a young man on the page turning away with a soft smile, eyes carrying a quiet sense of release. The lines were simple, but the emotion seemed to seep out of the character's expression. Rei's heart ached just from looking at it. The emotional power was overwhelming. Did I draw this? Rei whispered in shock. This level of expression. This depth of feeling. It was far beyond anything he had achieved in his previous life as a struggling manga artist. And on top of that, this page had taken him barely half the usual time. Drawing faster was one thing. But drawing with this level of emotional impact was something else entirely. That was talent, not technique. Could this be the result of his soul merging with this body? Chapter 3, Conversations. Rei held the freshly drawn manuscript in his hands, feeling more and more satisfied with it. Even without color, without music, without voice acting, the clean black and white lines of manga often carried emotions that animation could not match. He had always felt that way in his previous life whenever he compared a manga to its anime adaptation. He wondered if readers in this world would feel an even stronger impact from the manga version of 5 centimeters per second than he once felt watching the film. Thinking about it, Rei couldn't help but smile. The heartbreak he once suffered had been painful, but imagining others falling into the same emotional trap felt strangely amusing. Night passed quickly, and Rei woke up early the next morning. He washed up, made a simple breakfast and left for school. High school life in this version of Japan was not nearly as suffocating as his previous life. Society was structured differently here, and even students who did not pursue higher education could find stable jobs. That was why Rei, despite being in his first year of high school, still attended a regular day school rather than a cram school-style academy. When he entered the classroom, the morning atmosphere was the same as always. The diligent students in the front row were discussing grades or sports. The students in the back row were comparing manga, anime, and games. Even though the school officially forbade it, magazines and light novels always found their way into backpacks. It showed just how deeply the animation and manga culture permeated life here. The 2 morning math periods went by quickly. In his previous life, Rei had struggled as a manga artist, but he had actually graduated from a good university with a science and engineering major. Although years had passed since he studied these subjects, his foundation was solid. First-year math felt almost relaxing. Besides, high schools in this world were far less competitive, and the average academic level was not very high. If I keep this up, maybe I could even get into a good university here, Rei thought as the bell rang. But his thought was cut short. A lively, beautiful girl appeared at the classroom door, immediately drawing the attention of the boys. Every school had 1 or 2 girls who naturally became the focus of everyone's admiration. Miyuki Shiro was definitely one of them. Otherwise Rei would not have recognized her instantly on the rooftop yesterday. Rei. Yes, you. Come here for a second. She waved brightly from the door, her voice clear and pleasant. Every gaze in the classroom shifted from Miyu to Rei, the usually quiet boy who rarely stood out. Rei, though good-looking, had a reserved personality. Naturally, he was not someone people noticed often. When he looked up and saw Miyu, he already had a good guess why she was here. He stood up and walked toward the door. Last night my editor and I. Hold on. Are we talking here? Miyu glanced around at the curious faces staring at them. Let's go to the rooftop, she whispered with a small laugh. She only revealed her identity as a manga artist to Rei because she saw him as a like-minded creator. If random classmates found out, word would spread and the homeroom teacher would eventually show up at her house. That would be a nightmare. As the two left the classroom together, a wave of whispers immediately rippled through the room. On the rooftop. I talked to my editor. She said she can set aside time to review your manuscript, but she won't show any favoritism just because of me, Miyu said immediately, skipping all small talk. In fact, let me be honest. Because I introduced you, her expectations will be much higher. She'll judge your work at least 3 times more strictly than a regular mailed submission. If the quality isn't clearly above average, she won't accept it. I understand, Rei replied after a short pause, nodding. It was 5 centimeters per second, after all. If a solid one-shot like this could not even pass the review of a third-tier magazine's editor, then maybe that editor wasn't someone Rei should work with anyway. Besides, Rei wasn't asking Mayu for special treatment. He simply wanted his work to be taken seriously and not thrown aside like countless anonymous submissions. Japan's population was enormous, and Tokyo alone had millions of residents. Among them were countless aspiring manga artists. Every day, magazines received piles of envelopes containing drafts, dreams and desperation. A responsible editor might carefully read through each one, hoping to discover a hidden gem. But an irresponsible one could just flip through a few pages, sigh, and toss the envelope aside without a second thought. So, how should I arrange my schedule? Rei asked. Magazines did not operate on weekends, and Rei had school from Monday to Friday. He had mentally prepared himself to request a day off to bring his manuscript in person. When will you finish the manga? Mayu asked. Actually, it's already finished. The entire manuscript is in my bag in the classroom, Rei answered. Last night, something had clicked inside him. His inspiration surged, his hand moved effortlessly, and before he realized it, he had stayed up until 2 a.m. and completed what should have taken him another 2 or 3 days. He still wanted to polish a few early pages for perfection, but the manuscript was easily good enough for submission. So fast. Mayu blinked, genuinely surprised. Well then, how about this afternoon? But we get out of school at 5:30, and Hojimori Publishing Group's headquarters is in central Tokyo. By bus, it would take us until at least 7 p.m. Won't it be too late for your editor to wait? Rei hesitated. Of course we aren't going to Hojimori Group's editorial department, Mayu said with a small smile. We're going to my house. Rei looked up at her, confused, and Mayu quickly continued before he could overthink it. The editor I mentioned is actually my sister. I can't ask her to go easy on your manuscript, but asking her to review it after work isn't a problem. Your sister? Rei repeated. That's right. Surprised? Mayu laughed, her expression playful. But don't misunderstand. Like I said before, she's incredibly strict. Even with me. The only reason I managed to serialize in Sakura Iro Weekly is because my work genuinely beat the other submissions during that period. She lifted a finger as if emphasizing a warning. In fact, she's probably harsher on me than on any other artist. Rei blinked, processing this. So the editor Mayu trusted most was also her older sister. This certainly explained the confidence Mayu had in suggesting a direct submission. And it also explained why she had insisted he would receive no special treatment. Chapter 4, 5 centimeters per second. It's settled then. I'll call my sister at noon. After school, wait for me in your classroom, Miyuki Shiro said with a bright smile before heading toward the rooftop staircase. The 10-minute break was nearly over. Already, decided? Rei hadn't even finished speaking before Mayu's figure vanished into the stairwell. As she walked down, Mayu's thoughts drifted. Tonight, she would finally get to see Rei's manga for herself. 5 centimeters per second, right? Her ponytail swayed lightly as she descended the stairs, full of anticipation. Back in class, Rei was instantly surrounded by classmates who normally wouldn't talk to him for a week, all of them bombarding him with gossip and questions. Don't misunderstand. She just came to ask about one of my junior high classmates. Rei deflected the topic until the crowd finally lost interest. The last 2 periods of the morning were physics. During lunch break, Rei slipped up to the rooftop and used the remaining time to refine a few details in earlier pages of his manuscript. The afternoon consisted of foreign language and chemistry. Soon, school was over. Warm orange sunlight filled the classroom as students packed their bags. Some headed straight home, others drifted toward nearby cafes or convenience stores, continuing their noisy conversations. As they walked past the classroom doorway, many students suddenly paused, looking inside with surprise before glancing back at Rei. When Rei finished packing and stepped outside, he immediately saw Mayu waiting for him at the door, her bag over her shoulder. The setting sun painted the corridor in gold. Mayu stood quietly, completely unfazed by the stares of other students. She had been used to this since elementary school. Your chemistry teacher really knows how to drag things out. I waited almost 10 minutes, Mayu said with a teasing smile. High school teachers are the same everywhere. It just means they're dedicated, Rei replied. You talk like you've attended several high schools. They chatted as they walked, gradually attracting the attention of more students leaving school. Rei glanced at Mayu, wondering if the whispers bothered her, but she didn't seem to care at all. He thought for a moment. Even if the students liked to gossip, they weren't the type to spread harmful rumors. At the gate, Mayu raised her hand and hailed a taxi. She slipped into the back seat first, then looked at Rei, who had stopped just short of getting in. What's wrong? She briefly glanced at nearby students who were openly watching Rei with wide eyes, then shot him a small, amused smile. Get in. Hearing that, Rei finally slid into the taxi. Are you worried about what people think? Mayu asked. Are you afraid they'll misunderstand because we're getting too close? No, it's not that. Rei hesitated. I'm worried that you might care. I don't want to cause trouble for you. After all, I'm just an ordinary student. But well, you stand out. You're good academically, you're active in class. If some strange rumor spreads. Mayu blinked at him, taking a second look. You're more considerate than I thought. But didn't I tell you? She continued. I think of myself as a professional manga artist first, and only a part-time high school student. I care more about anything related to manga than school status or grades. Who I talk to and what I do has nothing to do with the opinions of people who don't matter to me. Rei shifted the topic, realizing the conversation was becoming a little too personal. There's something I've been curious about. With your grades, Mayu, why pursue a manga career? Is it just a hobby? Mayu looked out the window at the scenery rushing by. My mother was a manga artist, she said with a soft smile. So my sister and I grew up surrounded by manga. We loved it from the start. I've always wanted to become a manga artist. A famous one. That was my mother's dream before she passed away. And, it's mine as well. Mother, before she passed away. Rei caught the key detail instinctively but chose not to press further. Some topics were meant to be handled with quiet respect. The two of them chatted lightly in the taxi for a while, and before long, the car arrived at the entrance of a residential district. After Mayu showed her ID to the security guard, the taxi was allowed through, and soon it stopped in front of a 4-story luxury villa. Not all houses called villas were worth much. But a luxury villa in the middle of Tokyo was another matter entirely. No wonder Mayu was so confident in choosing the life of a manga artist over more conventional options. With her family's circumstances, she didn't have to fear uncertain career prospects or pressure about income. She could chase her dream wholeheartedly. And the way she had helped him, introducing him to her editor sister, bringing him home despite only knowing him for a few days, made much more sense now. Rei understood that she wasn't expecting anything in return. She was simply happy to meet someone her age who also loved drawing manga. The house might be a bit messy, so please don't mind, Mayu said with a smile as she unlocked the front door. Not at all, Rei replied, slipping into guest slippers and entering with his backpack full of 100 pages of manuscript. Despite her words, the interior was spotless. He didn't focus on the elegant decor, though. His attention was drawn immediately to the woman sitting in the first-floor living room, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. She looked to be in her early 20s. She resembled Mayu, but unlike Mayu's bright, lively energy, this woman carried a calm, composed air. Welcome back, Mayu, she said quietly. You're late. I've been waiting for over 15 minutes. I'm not the school principal. I can't control dismissal times, traffic, taxi routes or delays, Mayu said with a mischievous laugh as she headed into the house. She did not mention that it was Rei's teacher who had kept the class late. Her older sister, Misaki Yukishiro, quietly placed her coffee cup on the table, then looked first at Mayu, then at Rei. Welcome. You must be Mayu's friend, right? I'm Misaki Yukishiro. I work as an editor for Hojimori Publishing Group. Friend. Rei glanced at Mayu, who gave him an obvious wink. He caught on instantly. Nice to meet you. I'm Rei Kirishima. I know. Misaki extended her hand with professional confidence. I'm not someone who enjoys unnecessary polite chatter. Mayu told me that you admire Sakura Melody, and also my other discoveries, Rock Girl. And Dawn Trumpet. She said you respect the editors who brought those works to life. That's why you want to submit your manga to me. Rock Girl. Dawn Trumpet? What are those? I've never heard of them. Rei stared at Mayu in quiet panic, only to see her smiling sweetly at him. Her expression clearly said, "Don't reveal the truth." "Oh, yes. Yes, that's right. I've admired editor Yuki Shiro for a long time," Rei said, keeping a straight face. Misaki narrowed her eyes slightly, examining him as though she were evaluating a manuscript. "In that case, let me make this clear. I am very strict when reviewing submissions. Even if you are a newcomer and my sister's acquaintance, I will not lower my standards." She took a slow sip of coffee. "If your work is not good enough, I will criticize it honestly. You should be prepared." Mayu quickly waved her hands. Okay, sis. Don't be so intense. I'm still a rookie myself, and you're scaring Rei. I'm speaking to your friend, Misaki said calmly. You cannot answer for him. Mayu fell silent with a sigh, throwing Rei an apologetic look. Rei straightened himself. I understand. Please review it strictly, editor Yuki Shiro. Misaki's expression softened slightly. Good. Then show me your submission. Rei took a deep breath. He set his backpack on the chair, opened it, and carefully removed a thick file filled with his carefully drawn manuscript pages. 5 centimeters per second. Misaki murmured as she read the title on the folder. Mayu stepped closer as well, unable to resist. She had seen fragments of Rei's work before, but never the full story. This was her first time seeing it from the beginning. Misaki opened the manuscript. The first line of dialogue greeted her with quiet poetry. Hey, did you know? They say it's 5 centimeters per second, the speed at which cherry blossoms fall. A delicate illustration followed, depicting a long slope lined with cherry trees, petals drifting through the sky in soft black and white strokes. Misaki's expression sharpened immediately. Whatever the story might be, the artwork alone was unquestionably professional. Chapter 5, Time and Distance. The room fell silent as Misaki sat on the sofa, slowly turning the pages of Rei's manuscript. Meanwhile, Mayu had somehow drifted behind her sister, peeking over her shoulder. The story began with a boy and girl running playfully up the slope. Their voices unfolded in simple dialogue. You know, they say it's 5 centimeters per second. The speed at which cherry blossoms fall. Carrie, you know so much, the boy replied. Mayu turned the page, her expression softening. Sakura petals slipped through the girl's outstretched fingers. She looked back at the boy, smiling gently. Hey, don't you think it looks like snow? Mayu felt something stir in her chest. She tended to immerse herself deeply when reading manga, and Rei's drawing style, soft, atmospheric, beautifully composed, pulled her in completely. It was the kind of art that made the world around her fade away. So that's what the title meant, 5 centimeters per second. His dialogue is so delicate and evocative, she thought, glancing at Rei quietly sipping coffee beside her. Then the story reached its first emotional shift. The two children reached the top of the hill. The girl crossed the tracks just before the crossing gate lowered, separating them on opposite sides. She opened her umbrella, turned back and gave him a gentle smile. Carrie. The boy whispered. Takaki, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could see the cherry blossoms together next year? A passing train cut off their view of each other. Misaki, who had been leaning back casually at first, slowly sat up straight. She returned to pages she had already schemed and began rereading them carefully. Rei's manuscript contained over 100 pages. He divided the story into chapters, the cherry blossom chapter, the cosmonaut chapter, and the final standalone chapter, 5 centimeters per second. There was no music. No voice acting. Only the quiet rustling of turning pages in the Yuki Shiro family's living room. And yet, the loneliness and quiet ache of the story seeped out page by page, tightening around the sisters' hearts. It was impossible for Rei to reproduce every moment from the original animated film in black and white manga form. But the atmosphere remained, the solitude, the longing, the fragile sadness. It accumulated steadily, gently, until it melted into the hearts of both sisters. Carrie and Takaki became friends because of their shared interests, believing they would always study together, always be close. But when Carrie had to transfer because of her family, she gathered her courage to call him one last time, only to be met with the clumsy, painful reaction of a boy who didn't know how to handle emotions. After Takaki transferred, he carried the guilt of hurting her when she needed comfort most. A year later, exchanging letters one after another, the two finally admitted their wish to meet again. And then they acted on it. The boy planned everything carefully, the route, the transfer stations, the arrival time. He and the girl had decided it all together. But the snowstorm changed everything. Back then, information wasn't easy to check. If the boy didn't arrive on time, Akari, waiting alone in the freezing night, would almost certainly think she'd been stood up. Especially on such a bitterly cold night. When the train ground to a halt in the heavy snow, Takaki could only tremble helplessly, tears in his eyes. He prayed silently. Please. Akari, don't wait anymore. The sadness accumulated steadily, page by page. Until finally, in the early hours of the morning, several hours later than planned, Takaki arrived at the small rural station. He assumed Akari must have gone home already. No one would wait in below freezing temperatures for so long. He opened the waiting room door. Misaki turned to the next page. The kerosene lamp cast a dim glow across the old waiting room. And there, sitting alone with her head bowed, was Akari. Her small, lonely figure filled the entire panel. A sharp pang shot through Misaki's chest. She was still waiting. Behind her, Maya was already a mess. Her nose was red, her breath unsteady. But she refused to cry outright, it felt embarrassing to weep over someone else's manga. She glanced at Rei, only to find him smiling reassuringly at her. That small smile calmed her heart a little. He seems like such a bright, gentle person, Maya thought. Even if his art feels lonely and wistful, maybe the ending will be warm. They continued reading. Akari had thought Takaki wouldn't come. But even then, she clung to a tiny hope and waited until dawn. When Takaki finally arrived, Misaki turned the page, and her expression hardened, then subtly cracked. Her eyes showed a flicker of pain. There was no dialogue at all. Akari grabbed Takaki's sleeve tightly, her face hidden behind her lowered head. Not a single line described the long hours of waiting, the cold, the fear, the disappointment, the hope. But the tears sliding down the back of her hand told everything. Misaki stared at that silent panel for nearly 2 full minutes before she could breathe evenly again. Following that scene, the pages showed the two walking through snowy streets, sharing a small, innocent kiss beneath a blooming cherry tree, then talking quietly through the night in an old wooden shed. And then, as dawn broke, they stood before the train station. A soft farewell. A parting neither wanted, but both understood. Would they ever meet again? Could the promise to see the cherry blossoms together the next year still be fulfilled? Misaki kept turning the pages, only to find that the first chapter, Cherry Blossom, had already ended. The second chapter title appeared, Cosmonaut. Cosmonaut? Why this title? Misaki continued reading with sharpened focus. The chapter shifted to the point of view of Kane, a high school girl living in a quiet seaside town. She described her daily school life, her friends, and the boy she admired. Takaki Tano, who had transferred from Tokyo. Her secret crush. Her admiration. Her quiet, unspoken longing. Takaki was always staring into the distance as if searching for something he had lost. He was always checking his old, outdated phone. Was he contacting Akari? Misaki wondered. Would Kane's unrequited love end in heartbreak? At first, the loneliness that filled the Cherry Blossom chapter wasn't present. Kane's perspective was warm, hopeful, full of tiny joys and insecurities typical of a girl in love. But as the Cosmonaut chapter progressed, the tone changed. The narrative slowly shifted to Takaki's point of view. The truth unfolded quietly between the panels. He and Akari had long since fallen out of contact. The messages Takaki tapped into his phone every night, the ones Kane thought he was sending to someone special, were never actually sent. There was no recipient anymore. He simply wrote them out of habit, out of loneliness. Takaki and Akari were completely disconnected. Seeing this, Mayu stiffened, her eyes widening in disbelief. She turned to Rei. Rei looked calm. He noticed her stare and offered a small, reassuring smile. But that only made her more flustered. Rei, what is this? Akari and Takaki cared so much for each other in the first chapter, how could they lose contact for just a few years? Can a few hundred kilometers of distance really break apart two people who truly love each other? Chapter 6, Emptiness. Miyuki Shiro felt a little uneasy. But as her older sister continued flipping through the manga manuscript, the astronaut storyline in the second chapter reached its emotional peak. The moment where Kane was about to confess to Takaki brought tears to Misaki's eyes. "Please, don't be so gentle with me anymore." The girl, unable to hold back her tears, could only think that as she faced the boy's quiet, persistent concern. Kane had learned to surf the day before high school graduation, on a day when her confidence was at its highest, and she had finally decided to confess. But just as she gathered her courage, she met the boy's gaze. His eyes lingered on her, yet his heart did not. The confession never came. Instead, her unspoken feelings dissolved into tears she could no longer restrain. When Misaki reached this part, her fingers tightened around the manuscript. Strictly speaking, 5 centimeters per second was aimed at young adults, so Mayu's understanding of it wasn't as deep as Misaki's, someone who had already experienced a full school life. Mayu still thought the long-distance separation and the time gap that made the leads lose contact was a flaw. She genuinely believed that love could overcome anything. But Misaki, who had watched several of her college roommates go through painful breakups after graduation, could only sigh. Was this really a romance manga drawn by a high school student? Could someone that young really create a story that left her feeling so sad, helpless, and heartbroken? She quickly schemed through the rest of the second chapter, the cosmonaut one. Then she turned to the third chapter, 5 centimeters per second. The timeline jumped ahead, after Takaki had graduated from university. Young Takaki had just broken up with his girlfriend of several years. Her final message to him read: "Even if we exchange 1,000 text messages, the distance between our hearts will only shrink by 1 centimeter." Misaki fell silent. Mayu fell silent too. Considering the title 5 centimeters per second, if cherry blossoms fall at 5 centimeters per second, then at what speed do hearts grow closer? Two people dated for years. Compared to the beginning, had they even gotten a single centimeter closer? The best works don't spell out everything the author wants to say. They let the reader reach the answer on their own through a simple, limited storyline. When the Yukishiro sisters found themselves thinking the same thing, they were already completely drawn in. Just like Rei in his past life, and like countless fans of Makoto Shinkai's works, they were captivated by the story of Takaki and Akari. And soon, the manga answered their expectations. The grown-up Akari also came to Tokyo. Sitting alone on the train, she remembered the boy she had met at 13. She remembered feelings she had long forgotten. "So that's how it is," Misaki whispered when she reached that scene. No wonder Takaki's relationships with Kane and with the girlfriend he dated after starting work all came to quiet, nameless endings. For Takaki, the one he had truly loved was always Akari. Even after 10 years, after losing contact, after nearly forgetting each other's faces, if they were to meet again, that deep, sincere feeling would return instantly. True, passionate love does not disappear with time or distance. It settles quietly, takes root, and grows stronger without you noticing. "Rei, is this what you wanted to convey?" A hint of admiration flashed in Misaki's eyes. The theme had risen to a new level. Impressive. Mayu began to understand as well, and the way she looked at Rei completely changed. At first, Mayu only thought he was an ordinary manga enthusiast. His drawing skills were impressive, and his determination to sketch on the school rooftop under scorching 30-degree heat had moved her enough that she wanted to help him. She never truly believed Rei could create anything remarkable. But this manga completely overturned her expectations. Such a short story, yet it moved her so deeply she almost cried several times. The artwork, the narrative structure, the themes, nothing about it felt like the work of a beginner. Misaki flipped through the manuscript faster and faster, anticipation building within her. She wanted, no, needed, to see Takaki and Akari's reunion after more than 10 years. What would they say to each other after all this time? Finally, she and her younger sister, Mayu, reached the page depicting the unforgettable scene. A slope beneath the cherry blossoms. Railway tracks stretching across the view. Warning bells ringing from both sides of the crossing. And two people walking toward each other from opposite ends of the tracks. In the instant they passed, they seemed to sense something. Recognition. Familiarity. A heartbeat from the past. Yet because the commuter train was seconds away from crossing, neither of them slowed down. At this moment, if I turn around, I have a strong feeling she will turn around too. In the manga, Takaki does turn around, and the reader can faintly make out the woman on the other side beginning to do the same. Mayu's eyes widened. In the animation, what followed was a long shot of the passing train. But in this manga, Rei inserted several silent, dialogue-free panels that gently revealed why Takaki and Akari had lost contact in high school, and how they had slowly drifted out of each other's lives. At last, when Misaki reached the second-to-last page of 5 centimeters per second, she saw the illustration waiting there. How wonderful it would be, if we could see the cherry blossoms together next year. The promise they made more than a decade ago, on this very railway track, was finally about to be fulfilled. The same path. The same cherry blossoms. The same two people standing opposite each other, just like when they were children. But when the train rushed past and the petals danced in the air, Takaki looked across the tracks. Only to see cherry blossoms drifting down. The other side was empty. Just like the sudden, hollow ache rising inside both sisters, Mayu and Misaki. A powerful, suffocating emotion surged through them. It felt as though something had been scooped out from inside their hearts, leaving only emptiness. Misaki found her hands trembling. It hurt. It genuinely hurt. Her eyes drifted to Rei, who sat quietly on the sofa as though this had nothing to do with him. Then she turned to the final page of the manga. Takaki, seeing no one on the opposite side, first looked confused, almost lost. But then, a faint smile. A small, gentle exhale. And with an expression of quiet acceptance, he turned and walked away. Beneath it were the simple words. 5 centimeters per second, the end. How could this be? Mayu's voice quivered. Rei. How could this be the ending? Is this really the story of Akari and Takaki in your heart? That's right, Rei replied, glancing at the time. Over an hour had passed since they began reading. Editor Misaki, you've finished the manuscript. He took a steady breath. Chapter 7, Cooperation. Misaki set the manuscript down, and her gaze toward Rei changed completely. At first, when Mayu mentioned that a close friend who drew manga wanted to submit a piece through her, Misaki had intended to reject the request outright. That resistance only grew stronger when she learned the friend was the same age as Mayu. Japan's manga culture was rich, but most professional artists were adults. How could a high schooler balance school and manga creation? Where would so many prodigies like Mayu come from, especially not her friend? To Misaki, this submission sounded like someone self-indulging in a hobby, hoping to use Mayu's connections to take a shortcut. So she had taken a cold, arrogant stance with Rei to discourage him immediately. But now, Misaki stared at the manuscript on the table, her eyes constantly moving between the pages and Rei's face. She had a strong feeling, once this work was published, it wouldn't be overlooked. Rei Kirishima, right? Misaki stood up. I apologize for my earlier attitude. I underestimated you. I was far too arrogant. I've reviewed your submission, Misaki said. It's truly exceptional. So, my manga was accepted? Rei asked seriously. He had expected this outcome before he came. Even if 5 centimeters per second wasn't the strongest among Makoto Shinkai's works, it was on par with titles like Your Name and Weathering with You. There was no reason it wouldn't be accepted by a third-tier manga magazine in Tokyo. Yet when the words were finally spoken, he couldn't help letting out a tiny breath of relief. From an editor's viewpoint, I really like this manga, Misaki continued. It's the most impressive work I've handled in my 2 years at Sakura Iro Weekly. It's just... She paused. Your work is amazing, Rei. But whether it actually gets serialized depends on the serialization meeting at our editorial department. Serialization meeting. Misaki explained. Hojimori Publishing had several serialization magazines. Whenever an older series was about to end or get cancelled, the editorial department would hold a meeting to decide which new works would fill the open slots. Editors would gather, review the strongest submissions received during the cycle, and vote to determine which would receive serialization. And as an ordinary editor, Misaki didn't have enough authority to directly grant serialization in Sakura Iro Weekly. For 5 centimeters per second to be serialized, it would need approval from the majority of editors at the meeting. When is the meeting? Rei asked. He recalled Mayu mentioning that several series in Sakura Iro Weekly were ending soon. The day after tomorrow, Misaki replied. The day after tomorrow. Rei looked at Mayu, who nodded. No wonder she hurried him to submit the manuscript this afternoon. In any case, Misaki said, I think your work has an excellent chance. and I'd like to make a copy of your original manuscript. Although the serialization meeting is the day after tomorrow, each editor has to register and submit their artists' works by tomorrow. If you're willing, we can proceed with a preliminary cooperation agreement. Rei paused. Then, realizing the moment's importance, he straightened his posture and adjusted the hem of his clothes. Of course, no objections, Editor Misaki. That's exactly why I came here. Rei extended his hand. Misaki gave a soft smile and shook it. At 9 that evening, Mayu personally saw Rei out of the villa and walked him all the way to the entrance of the residential area. But she seemed distracted the entire time. Mayu? You okay? She had helped him so much today, and Rei couldn't just brush off her odd behavior as nothing to do with me. I was still thinking about the ending of 5 centimeters per second. Mayu finally said. Rei, do you really think it's okay for Takaki and Akari to just pass each other like that in the sea of people? Being a manga artist herself, she knew it wasn't polite to criticize someone else's plot, but she couldn't help it. Aren't mangas supposed to show readers a beauty that reality can't? Your ending is too sad. Her voice faintly trembled. Rei thought for a moment. Then think about it, what exactly is beauty that doesn't exist in reality? A pair of former lovers who barely remember each other, yet still carry a quiet longing in their hearts, and then, after years, they rekindle their feelings. Is that the beauty you imagine? Something unique to anime? Mayu froze. Or, maybe beauty is like Takaki, Rei continued softly, where many years later, he finds peace. He can turn away with a smile and walk toward a new life. That's also a kind of beauty, one that we, as creators, should show our readers. Mayu blinked at him. You're talking like you've been in love before. Aren't you just a 15-year-old freshman like me? Rei smiled faintly but didn't answer. Well, I did date twice in college in my previous life, though neither lasted. This is just my interpretation of 5 centimeters per second, Rei said. Even if I drew it, it's perfectly fine for you to have your own reading of the ending. But I honestly can't think of a better one than this. Just like Hamlet, no creator can offer a final interpretation that satisfies everyone, let alone Rei, who was merely recreating it. Anyway, readers of Sakura Iroh Weekly can be pretty sensitive. If your manga really gets serialized, you're probably going to receive a mountain of fan letters. Fan letters? Rei's expression turned odd. Right. Before serialization starts, I need to think of a pen name. There's no way I can use my real name. Chapter 8, Meeting begins. After seeing Rei off at the gate of the residential complex, Mayu returned home. The moment she stepped inside, she heard Misaki on the phone. Yes, that's right. Please cancel the romance manga Blue Dream I originally planned to submit at the serialization meeting the day after tomorrow. I'll be submitting a different title tomorrow. Expected length? 5 chapters, yes, a short series. That's correct. After a long conversation, Misaki finally hung up with the editorial staff. Mayu's mood brightened a little, the emotional pressure from 5 centimeters per second finally easing. Sis, wow, you really care about Rei's manga. You're scared you won't have enough time tomorrow, so you're calling colleagues late at night just to fix the submission schedule, aren't you? Rei was someone she introduced to Misaki, so seeing her sister value his work made Mayu genuinely happy. Misaki gave her a soft glance. Your friend has a great deal of potential. Of course he does, Mayu said proudly. It's only 5 chapters, but it's so emotional. Anyone can see he's gifted. In recent years, Misaki continued, several major manga magazines, including Hojimori Publishing Group, have been actively pushing for young artists to debut. Our editorial department was specifically asked to scout promising new creators. It's much easier now for young artists to rise. She paused. Mayu, I actually have high expectations for you. I truly think you may not be far from getting a serialization in Hojimori comic. But you must keep pushing yourself, otherwise. She gave a teasing smile. Don't let your friend surpass you. Het. Sis, don't exaggerate. Mayu waved her hand casually. Lament has been serialized for half a year and already has a solid fanbase. Even if 5 centimeters per second is good, how much impact can a 5-week short serialization really have? Rei is still far from catching up to me. The next day, when Rei stepped into his classroom, he found his classmates staring at him with strange expressions. He immediately understood why. Many students must have seen him riding with Maya yesterday. Well, Maya didn't care, so Rei wasn't going to stress about it either. Gossip always faded eventually. Since transmigrating, Rei had been drawing manga non-stop every day, but now that 5 cm per second was complete and just waiting for tomorrow's serialization meeting, he suddenly had nothing to do. During lunch, he went up to the rooftop, not to draw, but simply to breathe. He didn't run into Maya today. But that was normal. She had her own serialization to work on. She was probably drawing somewhere quiet in the school. Another day passed. Rei went to school as usual. Meanwhile, at 9 in the morning, inside a commercial high-rise in central Tokyo stood the headquarters of Hojimori Publishing Group, one of the 6 major manga companies in Japan. The 19th floor housed the editorial division. Hojimori published dozens of magazines, each with its own independent editorial team. Today, the entire floor was buzzing with activity as editors sorted through manuscripts. The editorial team of Sakura Iro Weekly had already gathered inside a conference room, waiting for their supervising director. Although officially called a serialization meeting, it was actually exclusive to the editorial team of Sakura Iro Weekly. A weekly magazine selling a few 100,000 copies didn't require the presence of Hashimori's editor-in-chief. High-level leadership only attended meetings for top-selling magazines like Hojimori Comic, which exceeded 10 million weekly sales. Thus, presiding over today's meeting was Moriyama Kaito, one of the 7 editorial directors of Hojimori Publishing. Each editor and attending manager had a thick stack of neatly organized manuscripts beside them. Misaki sat near the front, on the left side of the director's seat. Her position alone made it obvious. Her submissions ranked among the top 2 in the Sakura Iro Weekly editorial team. Across from her sat a tall, lean man in his 30s, Takeda Jun. His sharp gaze flicked toward Misaki, his strongest rival in the department. Even though Misaki was 10 years younger, her talent was undeniable. In just 2 years, she had discovered successful young manga artists. Especially the high school girl mangaka Saki. The latest chapter of her series Lament had climbed to 2nd place in the popularity poll, just 100 votes short of overtaking Takeda's high-score romance. Historically, every few years, the top-performing editor of Sakura Iro Weekly had a small chance of being transferred to Umetsuki Comic, one of the company's elite magazines. Of course, such transfers weren't guaranteed. Editors from other successful magazines would also compete for the spot. But the possibility was always there. Judging from the timing, the editorial department had probably already begun discussing staff adjustments behind the scenes. Otherwise, June wouldn't be so tense about today's serialization meeting. This year's timing really was special. If he could be transferred to work on the manga serialized in Umetsuki Comic, his income would increase 7 or 8-fold instantly, and his standing in the industry would rise just as sharply. After all, the average sales per volume for titles serialized there exceeded 1 million copies. Even with the tiny commission percentage editors received, the yearly income still reached into the high 6 figures, or even more. Misaki was undeniably skilled. Sooner or later, she would absolutely reach that level and become one of the core pillars of Hojimori Publishing Group. But right now, Takeda's thoughts grew sharper. There's a first come, first served order to things. If such a transfer opportunity appears, it should go to me, someone who has worked long and hard in this editorial department for over 10 years, not to a newcomer who's only been here for 2. He felt confident in the works he submitted for this meeting. Still, even a lion used full strength to hunt a rabbit. If he wanted to block his competitors from rising any further, the best approach was simple. Limit how many of their works made it into the serialization meeting. He was determined to secure both available serialization slots today. All right, let's begin the meeting. The door opened, and Moriyama Kaito, the director, walked straight to his seat and wasted no time. There are 2 open serialization slots. However, we have 21 submissions this round, so competition is extremely steep. Everyone, please begin reviewing the first manuscript on the table, Love Like Fireworks. Misaki picked up the prepared stack of pages. Normally, a title submitted for a serialization meeting would include only 2 or 3 chapters. Editors didn't read every panel in detail, with dozens of submissions, reading thoroughly would take an entire day and night. Everyone present was a professional. They focused on the essentials, art, pacing, panel flow, dialogue, and plot foundation. Not bad, Misaki thought after skimming 3 chapters. But unfortunately, still not enough. Takeda watched her expression and frowned. So calm? Don't tell me one of her submissions is stronger than mine. At this moment, the other editors began offering their opinions. Very good. Amazing. That plot twist. I think it's really interesting. A solid, high-quality manga, Misaki added. With everyone's response being positive, said Moriyama Kaito, we'll hold this one for the moment. He set the manuscript aside. Next, please review the second submission, 5 cm per second. Takeda lifted the manuscript from the table, but his brow furrowed the moment he touched it. Why is this so thick? All 5 chapters are included, Misaki replied calmly. It's my submission, a short story created by a new manga artist. I chose to present the entire work for the meeting. A short story? From a rookie. As Misaki finished speaking, the editors exchanged glances. While Sakura Iro Weekly didn't reject short-form works, the truth was that short stories had low commercial value and struggled to accumulate popularity. A 5-chapter story could only be printed as a single volume. The difficulty of getting a short story approved at a serialization meeting was far higher than for mid- or long-form works. And if the creator was a newcomer, scrutiny was even harsher. Takeda was secretly thrilled. With that kind of handicap, how could you possibly compete with me? His 2 submissions, Love Like Fireworks and Moonlight Glass, were both high-quality works drawn by well-known manga artists he'd worked with for years. There was no way they could lose to a 5-chapter short created by a rookie. He was certain of it. Takeda opened the manuscript of 5 cm per second, a smile spreading across his face. Chapter 9, Senses. At first glance, Takeda Jun focused on the manga's art style. As a newcomer's work, he expected to find plenty of flaws he could easily tear apart. But after flipping through a few pages, his expression gradually stiffened. While no manga was flawless, the art in 5 cm per second was undeniably above the standard of most titles serialized in Sakura Iro Weekly, perhaps even far beyond it. Unwilling to concede, Takeda kept reading. Like always, he schemed quickly, but scheming didn't mean he wasn't absorbing anything. Years of professional experience had trained him to read fast and accurately. Within moments, he understood the flow of the chapter. After turning 20-something pages, he reached the scene where Takaki, while switching trains, accidentally pulled out the handwritten letter he meant to give Akari, only for it to be blown away by the howling wind. And when Takaki bowed his head and cried on the empty train platform, the emotions built up across the earlier pages finally exploded. This level of immersion, from a new artist. Takeda's eyes filled with disbelief. It was true that the plot so far wasn't filled with dramatic twists. Makoto Shinkai's early works never relied on complicated plots. 5 cm per second could be summarized in a single line. A story of childhood sweethearts slowly drifting apart under the weight of time and distance. Hundreds, thousands, of romance manga in Japan tackled similar themes. But the experience of reading 5 cm per second, the delicate details and emotional layering, was completely different from ordinary works. As he read further, he saw the scene of young Akari waiting alone in the empty station lobby, head lowered, trembling anxiously until late at night. Something in Takeda's chest tightened. He was in his 30s. He had lived through several unforgettable relationships. For students who had never been in love, the story would feel painful and suffocating. For adults who had been in love, it was painful too, but also nostalgic, bittersweet, and achingly beautiful. Like the tears that fell on Akari's hand as she clutched Takaki's sleeve. There were no words in that panel, but her feelings were unmistakable. The fear that he wouldn't come. The dread that a year of exchanged letters was about to end. The sinking realization that this missed meeting could be their last chance. But when he arrived, those fears melted into relief, warmth, and joy. Those tears must have been burning hot. A nighttime walk. Bare branches sparkling under falling snow, appearing like cherry blossoms drifting in spring. A perfect echo of their promise to see the cherry blossoms together again next year. A kiss beneath snowlit sakura. Later, at the station, as the train pulled away, Akari reached into her pocket and pulled out her own undelivered letter. At that moment, Takeda felt something click. The boy lost his letter. The girl never delivered hers. What was the author implying? If neither letter reached its destination, what would have changed, if they had exchanged them, would the future have been different? He turned the page. The second chapter, The Astronaut, used the launch of a space probe as a metaphor for life, loneliness, isolation. Even if one traveled impossibly far into the universe, it was still nearly impossible to touch even a single hydrogen atom. Kane's confession ended before it could even begin. Knowing their relationship was impossible, she and Takaki watched the rocket ascend into the cold night sky. That rocket was about to embark on its loneliest journey. And what about Kane and Takaki? Jun Takeda's emotions churned violently. He forgot entirely about competing with Misaki. He simply kept turning pages, unable to stop himself. A quiet anticipation stirred within Takeda Jun. If even Kane couldn't enter Takaki's heart, then surely someday, Takaki would seek out Akari again. A girl like her, unforgettable to the point of pain. No matter how many years passed, wouldn't he one day want to see her again? Holding on to that hope, Takeda turned to the third chapter. This section focused heavily on the inner reflections of the two protagonists. Both had forgotten the details of that meeting more than 10 years ago. Yet each of them, in their own lives, dreamed of blurry scenes, shadows of emotions once so fierce they had carved themselves deep inside their hearts. And then, Takeda reached the moment where Takaki and Akari walked toward each other from opposite sides of the railway tracks, cherry blossoms drifting in the wind. But in the final, frozen moment, a train rushed past. The other side of the tracks was empty. Jun Takeda's face remained neutral, but inside, a deep, indescribable sadness spread through him. He looked around at the other editors. He wanted to say something, to criticize, to dismiss the manga. But every word he had prepared died in his throat. What was the point of saying anything? Everyone here had a trained eye. They could see the truth just as clearly as he did. The heavy silence in the room, the subdued, reflective expressions on the editors' faces, the way several of them gazed at the pages with a faint melancholy. All of it revealed the same thing. This short manga had hit them hard. "All right, everyone may begin commenting," Director Moriyama Kaito finally said. He paused, then looked at Misaki. "The creator of this short story, they're a newcomer." "That's right. Still a high school student," Misaki replied. A small ripple ran through the room. Everyone knew that in the past 2 years, the company had begun supporting exceptionally young manga creators. This was because several rival publishers had found surprising success promoting college-aged manga artists, branding them as genius prodigies, which drove sales sky-high regardless of literary depth. Moriyama considered this carefully. Then, with a small gesture, he signaled the editors to begin discussion. "Impressive. I think it's very well done. It's just that the ending is too sad. It might not match the usual tone of Sakura Iro Weekly," Takeda tried to argue. But before Misaki could even respond, several editors countered immediately. "There have been plenty of serialized romances with bittersweet endings. It's not a problem." "Exactly. The second female lead wins trope has been common for years. No need to restrict ourselves. Even though it's short, the ending is emotionally powerful. And the artwork is exceptional." "I agree. It really moved me. It reminded me of things I had nearly forgotten." Chapter 10, Pen Names, Royalties, and New Work. Rei knew that the serialization meeting for his manga was being held today, but he also understood that results were never announced on the same day. The final decision usually came from the senior editors at Hojimori Publishing Group the following afternoon. Even so, he couldn't help feeling anxious. He had confidence in the quality of 5 centimeters per second. But he had far less confidence in the judgment of upper management. He knew well, from both this world and his previous one, that many excellent works had been buried because someone in power made an irrational decision. Even Attack on Titan, in his past life, had been rejected by Weekly Shonen Jump before finding its true place elsewhere. Anyway, the results will be out tomorrow. Forcing himself to relax, Rei closed his eyes and went to sleep. But in his dreams, 5 centimeters per second was rejected. Every time he submitted it to another magazine, it was rejected again. Eventually he gave up drawing entirely and went back to studying, choosing an ordinary life instead. He woke up unsettled. Another uneventful school day passed, and when classes ended, someone Rei hadn't seen for 2 days stood waiting for him at the classroom door. Mayu peeked inside, spotted him, and waved cheerfully. A few classmates turned their heads. Was it true? The rumor around school was that Rei Kirishima from Class 3 and Miyuki Shiro from Class 1 were dating. who came to the door to pick up a friend every other day, and waited for him after school? Before Rei could think too much, his homeroom teacher dismissed the class, and he stepped outside. Your teacher really loves keeping students late, Mayu joked. But Rei wasn't in the mood to banter. Mayu, did the serialization meeting results come out yet? Yep. My sister texted me at 4 o'clock. She asked me to bring you to meet her after school. I only saw it once class ended. She added, if it hadn't passed, I wouldn't need to bring you. I could have just told you the result. So. Her smile deepened under the warm sunset. Congratulations, Rei. Rei opened his mouth, but all he could manage was, thank you. Mayu had played a huge role in everything. Without her, he would still be panicking about where to submit his manga. He might have ended up exactly like the nightmare he had last night, wandering from company to company, getting rejected endlessly. An hour later, Rei followed Mayu back to her family's villa. This was his second time visiting, and he felt slightly less awkward than before. And this time, he saw Misaki smiling for the first time. She wasn't naturally cold, she simply didn't smile unless she needed to. But now, she was smiling at the young mangaka who had helped her regain her footing in the editorial department. Before today's meeting, her submissions had lost to Takeda Jun twice already. Congratulations, Mr. Kirishima, Misaki said warmly. Your manga passed the serialization meeting. I invited you here to discuss the contract. She handed him a standard publishing agreement. A contract? A massive weight lifted from Rei's chest. He picked it up, though the dense legal text made little sense to him. Thankfully, Misaki explained. In summary, this covers your royalties. For Sakura Iroh Weekly, the payment was calculated per page, 7,000 yen as the baseline rate. But that was only the base. If a chapter ranked higher in that week's popularity poll, royalties increased accordingly. Even at the maximum boost, royalties wouldn't exceed 3 times the baseline. A typical manga had about 20 pages per chapter, 4 chapters per month. So the minimum monthly income for a newly serialized artist in Sakura Iroh Weekly was roughly 560,000 yen. As for Rei's 5 cm per second, it was already complete, over 100 pages in total. Even if every chapter ranked at the bottom, he would still earn nearly 700,000 yen guaranteed. With that money, Rei would finally have the confidence to deal with his parents' debt. Even if the court seized his home immediately, he could at least survive. Of course, Misaki added, royalties from weekly serialization weren't where mangaka made real money. The real earnings came from tankban sales, collected book volumes. The standard royalty rate was 8%. If a single volume sold for 500 yen, the artist earned 40 yen. This was already the bare minimum allowed by national publishing law. It was also standard treatment for new artists like Rei. And merchandise? Anime adaptations? Those used even more complex revenue formulas. Misaki gave him a wry smile. But don't even think about merchandise until your series becomes popular enough for an anime. Right now, focus on serialization first. Rei felt overwhelmed. His legal knowledge was already weak, and Japanese publishing contracts were dense with clauses he barely understood. Instinctively, he glanced at Mayu beside him. Don't look at me, she said, laughing. My contract is the exact same as yours. Of course it was. Publishers, no matter the country, always protected themselves first. New creators were at the bottom of the food chain, and many mangaka only realized the imbalance after their series exploded in popularity. There were artists whose anime merchandise earned billions of yen, yet they themselves only received a small one-time licensing fee. But Rei wasn't in a position to worry about all that. A brand new mangaka had no leverage. Accept the terms first, become successful, then renegotiate. After only a brief moment of thought, Rei took the pen Mayu handed him and began filling in his personal details. 10 minutes later, Misaki reviewed the contract and nodded. In that case, Mr. Kirishima, the partnership between you, me, and Hojimori Publishing Group officially begins. Rei exhaled, a quiet breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He then asked carefully. Now that 5 cm per second passed the serialization meeting, when will it start running in the magazine? 3 weeks from now, Misaki replied. Friday, June 13th. Your manga will debut in that issue of Sakura Iroh Weekly. She continued. The cover will feature our 2 new serializations, 5 cm per second and Love Like Fireworks. Your series will receive full promotional placement. Also, if possible, we'd like the first 5 pages of Chapter 1 in full color. Cover promotion. Color pages. For a rookie mangaka, that was huge. But there's another title debuting at the same time. Rei asked. That's right, Misaki said, smiling faintly. Good competition is healthy. Then she added, one more thing, Mr. Kirishima, have you decided on a pen name yet? As you know, Mayu publishes under Saki. A pen name helps protect your personal life. Rei thought briefly. Then let's go with Shirogane. It was the pen name he had used in his previous life, back when he was still struggling. He couldn't bring his past identity into this world, but letting his old pen name live again felt like a symbolic continuation of the life he once had. Misaki considered it for a moment. Shirogane, it has a nice sound. She extended her hand. Then it's a pleasure to work with you, Mr. Shirogane. And, she added, you haven't eaten yet, have you? Mayu and I haven't either. Why don't we have dinner together? There are still several details about the serialization process that I'd like to discuss with you. This was Misaki's usual approach. She often shared meals with her authors or visited them in person. Strong relationships made future editing smoother, less friction during manuscript revisions, less awkwardness when urging deadlines. After all, it's harder to get angry at someone who buys you dinner. That night, Rei returned home. Now that the results of the serialization meeting were confirmed, all the tension that had been weighing on his heart finally loosened. Lying on his bed, he found himself imagining all kinds of possibilities, what readers would think, how 5 cm per second would be received, whether the serialization would spark discussions online, and what would come after. Finally, I've taken the first step. Rei didn't know how long he lay there with that thought before he drifted into sleep. In his dreams, he returned to his past life. Late at night, he was watching a movie alone, watching carefully, savoring every detail, while reliving the same sadness he had once felt years ago. After finishing the film, he immediately looked up the original novel. The title, the story, the emotions carved into his memory, they all flowed through him again as he slept. When he opened his eyes the next morning, Rei felt an overwhelming heaviness in his chest. His expression was strained, and his eyes were faintly red, a residual sadness from the dream, from the story he had recalled so vividly. Rei had always been the type to immerse himself deeply in fiction. Stories could shake him to his core. And the title resurfaced clearly in his mind. Tonight, even if this love vanishes from the world. It was the romance novel by Misaki Ichijo that had once moved him so deeply in his past life, along with its film adaptation. A girl whose memories vanished every time she fell asleep. A boy who loved her despite her forgetting him again and again. The title itself served as the premise, the catalyst, and the tragedy. There were many similar works, One Week Friends, the anime film A Thousand Years in Hyrule, but none of them left a deeper mark on him than Tonight, even if this love vanishes from the world. A sharp pang hit Rei's stomach. Why am I remembering all these heart-crushing stories first thing in the morning? He groaned internally. Come on brain, give me the plot of Gintama or something. Let me draw a gag manga for once. This wasn't the double comedy he wanted, first tragic romance in 5 cm per second, now another emotional gut punch. This new story was just as devastating, sweet at first, then painfully bitter. But since it only had a live-action film adaptation, not an anime, it never spread widely in the anime community. Still. Rei rubbed his forehead and began thinking seriously. 5 cm per second would only run for 5 chapters. In 1 month, it would end. And now, at the perfect moment, he had remembered a story he could adapt next. If I want my second serialization to ride the momentum of the first, I need to start preparing the next manga right now. The fact that the original work was a novel didn't matter. In the manga and anime industry, stories jumped between formats all the time. If the core narrative was strong, it didn't matter whether it started as a novel, manga, or film. A good story transcended form. Chapter 11, Plan. For the next several days, although Rei continued attending school as usual, his attention had already shifted almost entirely to the upcoming serialization of 5 cm per second in Sakura Iroh Weekly. With the release date already locked in, and the printing schedule extremely tight, Rei had less than a week to finish coloring the 5 required full-color pages for Chapter 1. On top of that, there were countless small manuscript adjustments. The workload wasn't huge, but the tedious repetition drained him, keeping him up late each night. Realistically, this pace would crush an ordinary manga artist. Weekly serialization usually requires several assistants to handle inking, tones, backgrounds, and cleanup. But unlike most artists, Rei didn't need to spend time figuring out storyboards or refining plot beats. Every panel and emotional shift already existed in his mind. All his time could go straight into drawing. And ever since merging with this body, his drawing speed had become unbelievably fast. Hiring assistants would only distract him and make the artwork inconsistent. So when Misaki suggested he find helpers, Rei politely declined. June 1, Misaki's villa. Rei returned once again to the upscale villa complex where Misaki lived. When Misaki was at work, Rei was in class. When Rei had weekends free, she just happened to be off from the company. Their schedules miraculously aligned. The school obviously wouldn't allow him to skip classes repeatedly for manga work, but fortunately Misaki didn't mind squeezing Rei's deadlines into her own off hours. Inside the living room. Better than I expected, Misaki said as she organized the completed manuscript. It doesn't look like the work of a newcomer at all. Mayu, sitting beside her, nearly burst with jealousy. Her sister had never praised her this openly. Rei accepted the compliment humbly. After all, he wasn't truly a beginner, just a failed artist reincarnated with a second chance. In that case, Misaki continued, closing the folder, the final draft of 5 cm per second is approved. I'll submit everything to the company tomorrow. Thank you for your help these past few days, Rei said politely. He hesitated, then asked. I wanted to confirm. 5 cm per second will only run for 5 weeks, right? That's correct, Misaki nodded. Then, once it ends, if a serialization slot opens up, can I submit a new manga to compete for it? That question froze the room. A new slot? Misaki raised her brows. You already have another manga idea? Mayu asked, surprised. Yes, Rei replied. I came up with it around the same time as 5 cm per second. And in my own opinion, it's not inferior. Since 5 cm made it into the magazine, I'd hate for this one to be buried. Misaki's eyes brightened. If Rei could produce something on PAR with 5 cm, then this was a serious opportunity. But the brightness faded as she shook her head. Rei, your idea is a little too idealistic. What do you mean? There isn't enough time, Misaki said. Rei blinked. Not enough time. Misaki sighed lightly. Even though 5 cm starts serialization in 2 weeks and ends 7 weeks later, the slot after yours has already been assigned. Several excellent entries appeared at the serialization meeting. And because 5 cm per second is a short 5-chapter series, the editorial department already designated its successor. She looked at him sympathetically. There won't be another internal meeting for that slot. Mayu added softly, if you'd submitted that new idea during the serialization meeting, both of your manga might have been serialized together. It's a shame we didn't know earlier, Misaki finished. I see. Rei lowered his eyes, disappointment slipping into his voice. But there was no helping it. Great manga didn't enter serialization just by existing. They needed timing, magazine vacancies, editorial votes, and luck. But it's hard to say for sure. The lower-ranked series in Sakura Iroh Weekly haven't been doing well lately. The 6th volume of The Sound of the Clouds only sold 20,000 copies in its first week. That's practically a disaster. If this keeps up, the magazine will probably exit in a few weeks, Mayu said, her eyes shifting thoughtfully. Rei, you should focus on finishing your new manga first. It'll be best if I can look over it early, spot any flaws, help you fix pacing issues. That way you won't miss the next opportunity when it comes. Mayu grinned brightly as she said this, clearly still under the emotional influence of 5 cm per second. Just like in his past life, after watching 5 cm, he immediately looked up all of Makoto Shinkai's other films, The Garden of Words, Your Name, Weathering with You. Once someone gains confidence in a creator through a single work, that trust tends to solidify, at least until the creator releases something truly awful. Mayu had said 5 cm was painful, too sad, too heavy, but without realizing it, she had already become a fan. Now she was eagerly anticipating Rei's next project. I understand. Rei nodded. Then I'll leave it to editor Misaki to keep an eye out for any serialization openings in the group. Misaki's expression softened. Of course. But let me ask, you know Sakura Iro Weekly only serializes romance manga. If your new work isn't in that category. Don't worry, Rei replied with a small laugh. It's pure romance. No third wheels, no long-distance separation. Then, is it another story with a regretful ending like 5 centimeters per second? Mayu asked carefully. Regretful. Rei paused, then shook his head with a gentle smile. For the two leads, there are no regrets between them. He didn't mention that the readers might not feel the same way. Rei hated spoiling stories. If Misaki and Mayu were curious, they would just have to read it themselves. Mayu let out a soft sigh, half relieved, half disappointed. She said she disliked tragic stories, yet in some quiet corner of her heart, she still anticipated that beautiful, painful feeling. It was nearly 9 o'clock by the time Rei finally got home after taking the bus. He pushed open the worn wooden door, switched on the light, and saw the living room table covered in sheets of character design sketches. In his previous life, tonight, even if This Love Disappears Tomorrow had existed only as a novel and a live-action film, there was no manga adaptation. Creating a manga version would be far more work than 5 centimeters per second. He would need new character designs, new scene layouts, new environmental backgrounds, fresh paneling decisions. Of course, many emotional keyframes could be referenced from the film, guaranteeing a certain minimum quality. Rei sat down, exhaled, and looked at the scattered sheets. All right. He murmured. He picked up his pen. Let's begin. Chapter 12, First Serialized Issue. As June arrived, the temperature soared, matching the heat of Japan's competitive manga industry. While the top 6 national magazines maintained unmatched prestige, that didn't mean smaller publications lacked a future. Readers' tastes were more diverse than ever. Because the biggest magazines prioritized commercial value and action-heavy shonen titles, romance series were comparatively scarce. And that was precisely why romance-centered weeklies like Sakura Iro Weekly continued to flourish. Although distributed mainly across Tokyo and surrounding prefectures, Sakura Iro Weekly still achieved impressive sales, around 800,000 copies per issue. Within its region, its brand recognition wasn't much lower than the top-tier magazines dominating the national charts. Even though the official debut of the new serializations was scheduled for next week, the 13th, this week's issue, which released on the 6th, had already started heavily promoting the 2 new manga. The promotion included full-color spreads illustrated by Rei Kirishima and veteran artist Yuto Amamiya. Rei's promotional art depicted a girl in a knee-length skirt and a boy catching his breath after running downhill, meeting at a railway crossing as a train approached. Cherry blossoms drifted through the air, overflowing with a quiet, nostalgic beauty. Across the illustration was the title, 5 centimeters per second, by Shiro Gain. The accompanying tagline read, "Do you know what 5 centimeters per second represents?" The aesthetic and composition clearly hinted at a bittersweet, romantic coming-of-age story. Within the Sakura Iro Weekly discussion boards, loyal fans quickly reacted. 5 centimeters per second, unusual title. Is this replacing Love After School? Never heard of Shiro Gain before. Must be a newcomer. But damn, this art style is clean. And Love Like Fireworks is debuting too. Yuto Amamiya's first new series in a year. Everyone, please vote for it. Don't let a rookie beat it. Sakura Iro Weekly needs something fresh ASAP. Most of last year's new serializations were mid. Only Lament was decent. Too many school romances. It's getting repetitive. But 5 centimeters doesn't even look like a typical school romance. No uniforms, city railways, could be a retro-style romance. I'll check it out next week for the art alone. Hope it surprises me. The Sound of the Clouds sold 20k last volume. But Love After School barely sold 10k and was last place for 6 weeks straight. Of course it got axed. In Japan's huge manga market, 2 new serializations barely created a ripple. Discussions surged, then faded into the background noise of the internet. Outside of Rei and a handful of industry insiders, most readers greeted the newcomers series with mild curiosity at best. Wednesday morning. The newest issue of Sakura Iro Weekly hit bookstores across Tokyo and surrounding prefectures early Wednesday morning. Priced at 650 yen, the anthology contained 18 serialized manga, nearly 400 pages total, each chapter roughly 20 pages long. For many office workers, finishing the entire magazine in 1 week was nearly impossible. But for Kana Uehara, things were different. 2 weeks earlier, she'd broken up with her boyfriend. Last week, she'd finally resigned from her draining job. Now, she drifted through her days numb, exhausted, and heartbroken. Only good food and romance manga could soften the ache. Still wearing the neat, stylish office outfit she hadn't fully let go of, Kana entered the already bustling bookstore. She walked straight toward the rack displaying the newest magazines. There it was, wrapped in glossy plastic. The cover featured 2 contrasting halves. Left side, a railway crossing under drifting cherry blossoms, a boy and girl face to face. Right side, the cast of love like fireworks in crisp, youthful styles. Kana stared at it for a moment, quietly hoping. Please, let these be good. Kana Uehara took a deep breath. After paying for the magazine at the counter, she turned left toward a nearby cafe. She ordered a coffee and a small cake for breakfast, went up to the second floor, found her favorite window seat in the corner, and carefully unwrapped the latest issue of Sakura Iroh Weekly. Flipping through the index, the first chapter featured her longtime favorite romantic comedy. High-scoring romance. It had been ranked number 1 in the reader polls for 18 consecutive weeks and was the 5th serialized work of popular mangaka Yuta Shiba. At this point, it was considered one of Sakura Iroh Weekly's flagship series. Of course, every romance manga eventually faced the same problem: once the couple gets together, the charm fades. After spending 10 minutes on the chapter, Kana sighed slightly. It wasn't bad. It just didn't have that spark anymore, the youthful shine she loved. She then flipped to Lament, created by the genius high school mangaka Saki. She read quietly for a long while before letting out another sigh, this time of admiration. Unlike high-scoring romance, Lament's pacing tightened in the later arcs, completely avoiding filler. The reading experience was far smoother. After that, Kana turned her attention to the newly serialized manga. 5 centimeters per second, hey! She murmured softly. Drawn in by the illustration style she'd noticed earlier, she flipped straight to its first page. The opening spread was a watercolor soft depiction of falling cherry blossoms, accompanied by simple but poetic narration. Did you know? It said they fall at 5 centimeters per second. Cherry blossoms. They drift down at 5 centimeters per second. Is this the origin of the title? Kana wondered, sipping her coffee as her interest grew. Lines like these didn't explain the setting. They didn't push the plot forward. But they flowed beautifully, and carried quiet emotion. Whoever the creator Shirogane was, Kana thought, they must be a very sensitive person. In the manga, the girl named Akari opened her palm, letting petals slip between her fingers. Doesn't it look like snow? Ah! That kind of ambiguous, delicate dialogue. Some readers might call it pointless. But people like Kana loved it. A girl running down a gentle slope, a boy chasing after her. Just as she crossed the railway tracks, the crossing gates fell, trapping them on opposite sides. The tracks became a visible line between 2 worlds. Akari lifted her red umbrella against the drifting petals and smiled, a smile soft as spring itself. I hope we can see the cherry blossoms again next year. Same scene as the film. Different artist. Different paneling. A completely new emotional impact. Ari's draftsmanship still had room to grow, but his ability to convey emotion, the subtle shift in eyes, the trembling of a smile, was astonishingly strong. The panels were deceptively simple, but somehow Kana felt a quiet sadness forming in her chest, even though she had no idea what happened next. Why did this scene feel so lonely? As the chapter moved from color to black and white storytelling, the atmosphere shifted. The faint melancholy deepened. The story shifted into Akari's inner monologue, Takaki written like fragments of letters addressed to. When I think back, I even miss the unbearably hot Tokyo summers, the melting asphalt roads. The last time we met was at graduation. Takaki, do you still remember me? To Takaki. Thank you for your letter. Autumn has already arrived. Yesterday was the first time this year I wore a sweater. A few short panels, paired with Akari's gentle narration and Takaki's increasingly lonely expression, were enough for Kana to grasp the situation. The boy and girl who once promised to watch the cherry blossoms together next spring, hadn't seen each other for an entire year. Akari had transferred schools. Their only contact now came from exchanged letters, each telling small pieces of their days. Their longing grew stronger. Originally, they lived only a few prefectures apart. But now that Takaki was also transferring, this time far, far away, the distance between them would stretch into something impossible. A distance two middle schoolers could never hope to cross again. Before he moved, they decided to meet one last time. There's a huge cherry blossom tree near my home. When spring comes, the petals fall at 5 centimeters per second. I kept thinking, how wonderful it would be if spring and Takaki could arrive together. Akari. The plot unfolded slowly but delicately, and combined with the soft backgrounds and unique paneling, Kana felt her chest tighten the moment she reached the scene of Akari sitting alone, writing. One lone bird in the sky. A quiet town dyed orange by the setting sun. A single girl writing words she couldn't say aloud. The loneliness seeped straight into the reader. The two, desperate to see each other again, arranged their meeting. Takaki would travel by train. Akari would wait at the station at 7 p.m. The manga never explicitly said it, but Kana felt it deep in her heart. If they failed to meet this time, they might never see each other again. Thousands of kilometers was enough to defeat even adults, much less two kids. Kana closed the magazine for a second. What kind of manga is this? She had never seen anything like it. It wasn't a typical romance comic. It was almost like reading poetry, beautiful, quiet, painfully delicate. Then the manga shifted into a flashback. How Akari and Yuto first met. How they bonded over shared loneliness and similar interests. How they promised to attend the same middle school. And how everything shattered the night Akari's family made her transfer away. She had called Takaki, hoping for comfort, a chance to see him one last time. But the boy, devastated and frightened by the idea of losing her, could only choke out. Enough. Stop talking. Kana slammed the page. What the hell? How could you say that to her? Akari had been forced by her family to transfer schools. She had no choice. She called Takaki that night to apologize, and this was the only response she got. Anger welled up in Kana's chest as she read on, but she couldn't stop turning the pages. The flashback ended, and a year later Takaki boarded the train heading toward the town where Akari now lived. But a sudden snowstorm ruined everything. He had to change trains twice, and each connection was delayed, something Takaki had never anticipated. During the long wait, he wrote a letter. Everything he'd wanted to tell Akari for the past year. His apology for that night. His honest feelings. He planned to give it to her the moment they met. But while waiting at the transfer station, the letter slipped from Takaki's coat pocket. A sharp gust of freezing wind lifted it high into the air, and carried it away into the dark, snowy sky. Gone. Standing on the platform, the boy hung his head. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. It wasn't just the lost letter. It was because he was already late. Their meeting time 7:00 p.m. had long passed. Now it was 8:15 p.m. Kana Uehara flipped the page. But there was nothing more. The first chapter of 5 centimeters per second ended there. A heavy pain settled in her chest, the kind that comes when a story cuts off right before the most important moment. Why do mangaka always do this? Why stop right here? Was Akari still waiting for him? If she wasn't, then Takaki would soon be moving even farther away, to a distant prefecture thousands of kilometers from Tokyo. Would this snowstorm truly separate them forever? Would they never meet again? Kana felt a dull ache rise inside her. The sadness wrapped around her like her own heartbreak had 2 weeks ago. What kind of manga is this? How can a first chapter hurt this much? Is this really the work of a newcomer? Chapter 13, Evaluation and Competition. This work. Kana Uehara took a deep breath. How many manga become legendary from the very first chapter? But for most series, the first chapter is enough to reveal the creator's true ability. The character depth and delicate emotional pacing in 5 centimeters per second were far beyond what a newcomer should be capable of. Kana carefully flipped through the color pages. There was also a small creator introduction for Shirogane. A quick look up on Chikan showed a single line. Shirogane, a high school student living in Tokyo. An underage rookie mangaka. Kana blinked. A high schooler? That had to be a joke. A teenager might be able to create fluffy school romance fantasies. But this? A melancholic, quiet, painfully realistic story aimed at young adults? Impossible. Just as Kana was mulling over Shirogana's identity, thousands of fans were already flooding the Sakura Iroh Weekly Forum, a sub-site under Hojimori Publishing Group. Although the internet in this Japan wasn't as advanced as the world Takaki remembered, online forums were still lively. Readers of weekly manga magazines always gathered to discuss new chapters the moment an issue hit stores. As expected of Yuto's new series, the first chapter of Love Like Fireworks was adorable. Lament was mid this week. Honestly, this chapter was way better than high-scoring romance. That one's basically filler now. I'm not buying the next tankman. Voting for Lament this week. By the way, did anyone read the other new series this week? You mean 5 centimeters per second? Yeah, what did you think? Thank God someone mentioned it. I thought I was the only one who liked it. Same. The characterization of Akari and Takaki almost made me cry. Haven't seen a romance manga with this much emotional detail in ages. But damn, it's slow, an entire chapter and they still haven't met. What's it about? Worth reading? Depends on taste, but the first chapter hooked me. Everyone should at least check it out. It's nothing like the usual Sakura Weekly formula. I love slow burn romance. Spoiler, the leads are in middle school. The setting feels like the early Heisei era, no phones, only letters. A long-distance relationship romance? That's bold for a debut. No way it lasts more than 20 chapters, the plot will collapse. We'll see. Personally, 5 centimeters per second was my favorite new chapter this week. Okay, you convinced me, I'll go read it. Even though it was only the first chapter, 5 centimeters per second didn't spark any massive hype yet. But during her break, Misaki checked the forum comments, and felt relieved. There were no negative comments at all. Readers praised the emotional pacing, subtle storytelling, and art, and most importantly, they had the patience to follow this quiet, slow-moving narrative. That alone was the best possible outcome. Inside the editorial department. Congratulations, Takeda. The early fan reactions to your new series are great. Several editors gathered around Takeda-jun, grinning. And you too, Misaki, the feedback for 5 centimeters per second is very solid. I wonder how the popularity poll will look this week. The first chapter rankings for new series are always fun to watch. Sakura Iroh Weekly's fan voting system had moved entirely online. Readers just had to enter the serial number from the magazine to cast their votes. Much easier than the old postcard system. Previously, even a magazine selling 800,000 copies might get only a few hundred mailed-in votes per issue. Now the number had increased tenfold, sometimes dozens of times. Honestly, a chubby editor with glasses said with a laugh, 5 centimeters per second won't lose to Love Like Fireworks. The editor-in-chief and everyone at the serialization meeting were blown away. Wouldn't surprise me if it breaks into the top 5 of the popularity rankings in its debut. Misaki and Takeda both glanced toward the female editor, a faint displeasure flashing in their eyes. Although Misaki and Takeda were rivals within the Sakura Iroh Weekly editorial team, their competition had always been straightforward and professional. Everyone did their job, no pettiness. But this particular female editor. Not only were her own results terrible, she also loved stirring up drama inside the team. To be blunt, her comments were pure troublemaking. 5 centimeters per second was a short series, and its opening was intentionally slow. It was already fortunate that fans reacted positively. Surpassing Yuto's brand new work, especially one backed by years of loyal readers, was simply unrealistic. Her words weren't encouragement. They were empty flattery meant to provoke. I'm not aiming for the top 5, Misaki replied mildly. As long as it doesn't land in the bottom 3, it's fine. Even the series I serialized before, right up until cancellation, never scored that low. The slightly chubby female editor who had spoken earlier immediately shut her mouth. In the last few months, 2 of her manga had been axed from Sakura Iroh Weekly due to low popularity. Everyone knew that a series only gets cancelled when it ranks dead last. Misaki's comment hit her like a slap, softly spoken, but unavoidable. After the woman went silent, Misaki and Takeda exchanged a glance. In that moment, they understood each other perfectly. There was no doubt. Yuto, with 6 years of serializations and a solid fanbase, would naturally have higher starting popularity for her new romance manga compared to a debut work like 5 centimeters per second. But the real question was, how long would that advantage last? With both series running side by side in the same magazine, comparisons were inevitable. And 5 centimeters per second would conclude in just 5 chapters. If during those 5 weeks, even once, Shirogana's 5 centimeters per second surpassed Yuto's love like fireworks in the reader popularity rankings, then in the eyes of the entire editorial department, the winner would be unquestionable. It would be 5 centimeters per second. Chapter 14, Fans, Ranking Order. After school, Rei stepped out of the school gate and headed straight toward the nearest bookstore. A prominent display inside showcased Sakura Iroh Weekly. Since it was already afternoon and the school was nearby, only a few copies remained. Rei picked up one, ready to buy it and head home. After all, this was the first issue featuring his serialized manga 5 centimeters per second. Of course he wanted to buy a copy and check how his artwork looked in print. Rei? You're here too? A female voice called out behind him. Rei turned to see 2 classmates, Yui Nakamura and Hana Fujimoto. Both girls were academically weak and sat in the back row of the classroom, diagonally opposite his seat. They weren't particularly close. You like Sakura Iroh Weekly too? Hana asked, her eyes brightening when she saw the book in Rei's hand. 2. Rei froze for a moment. That's right. Yui and I both came to buy it. We've been fans of this magazine for years. So, Rei, which manga do you like? Lament? Or maybe high score romance? Rei blinked, surprised that 2 students from his class turned out to be readers. And based on Hana's expression, she was definitely a seasoned manga fan. Seasoned manga fans always had that unmistakable excitement in their eyes whenever they talked about their favorite series. Rei knew that expression well. Me? Rei said, stepping toward the counter to pay. I like 5 centimeters per second. 5 centimeters per second. Hana repeated, confused. She glanced at Yui. Do you know it? No. I don't think that manga exists in Sakura Weekly, Yui frowned. Rei smiled, taking the magazine and waiting for his change. It's a brand new series starting this issue. You can read chapter 1 inside. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. What are you bragging about? Yui laughed. You just bought the magazine. You haven't even read it yet. How would you know the manga is good? Are you the author or something? You guessed right, Rei replied casually. Of course, he knew they wouldn't believe him, so he simply leaned into the joke. Oh, and let me give you a spoiler, this one's really sweet. You'll love it. Make sure to follow it every week and vote for it online. After saying that, Rei waved goodbye and left the bookstore with the magazine. Yui and Hana exchanged glances, curiosity blooming in their eyes. Rei, a boy, buying a shoujo manga? Suspicious, Yui muttered. Maybe he isn't buying it for himself, maybe it's for his girlfriend, Hana whispered conspiratorially. You mean? Yui instantly remembered the rumors spreading around school. Rei and Miyu from class 1 had been seen together after school many times, enough for people to assume they were dating. No way, Miyu? She. Okay, stop guessing. Let's just buy the book and go, Hana said. She picked up her copy of Sakura Iroh Weekly, and the color cover for 5 centimeters per second immediately caught her eye. There really is one. And the art style was surprisingly beautiful. Rei's words echoed in her mind. A super sweet manga. Later that night, Rei stayed up drawing the first chapter of Tonight, even if this love disappears from the world. Until late, nearly oversleeping the next morning. He rushed to school, and after taking his usual seat, Hana turned around with a bright grin. Rei. You were right. I read 5 centimeters per second last night. It's so good. The art is amazing. I'll definitely keep following it. Thank you, Rei said quietly. What are you thanking me for? Hana giggled. You didn't actually believe you must be the author joke, right? Rei just smiled and didn't answer. Classes dragged on through the morning, and by lunchtime, Rei found someone familiar waiting at the classroom door. Miyu's appearance in the hallway instantly drew attention from nearby students, but Rei was already used to the stares she attracted whenever she showed up to find him. The two left the classroom together and headed up to the rooftop of the school building. Do you need something? Or did Editor Misaki want to talk to me? Rei asked. Even if my sister doesn't need you, can't I? Miyu huffed. But she didn't string him along for long. She pulled out her phone, opened a picture, and held it out. What's that? Rei asked. This is the preliminary ranking for the newest chapters in Sakura Iroh Weekly. It only counts votes from the first 24 hours after release. My sister sent me the picture this morning, Mayu said proudly. Rei quickly leaned closer. 9th. His expression tightened with disappointment. The first chapter of 5 cm per second ranked 9th. Meanwhile, Love Like Fireworks, the other new serialization launched in the same issue, ranked 6th. What's with that face? For a brand new mangaka, making 9th place on your very first serialized work is already impressive. What were you expecting? Mayu said, rolling her eyes. That other new manga is by a veteran artist with an existing fanbase. Of course you can't beat them right away. And don't underestimate 9th place. Once the second chapter comes out next week, without color pages or cover promotion, it might drop even further. She gave a dramatic sigh before pointing at her phone again. More importantly, why are you staring at your ranking? Look at mine. Yours? Rei asked. His eyes slid upward on the ranking list, then widened. At the very top. Popularity ranking number 1, Lament author, Saki, votes, 3,912. The plot for High Score Romance was garbage this week, so its fans revolted. Mayu puffed out her chest in pride. And thanks to that, after 2.5 years as a serialized mangaka, I finally hit number 1 in Sakura Iroh Weekly. She grinned triumphantly. Well? Amazing, right? You dragged me onto the rooftop at lunch just to show off. Rei said helplessly. What else? Mayu said bluntly. What's the point of getting first place if I don't brag about it? Anyway, keep working hard, Junior. With your talent, maybe in 2 years you'll catch up and take the number 1 spot too. Her smile turned mischievous. But by then, I might already be serializing in Dream Comics, adored nationwide as a rising genius mangaka. Rei could only stare weakly. But he understood. She was a teenager. An excitable, overly dramatic teenage mangaka. And she genuinely saw him as a friend, otherwise she wouldn't have bothered coming all the way here just to brag. People only share their happiness with those they trust. Still, wasn't she getting a little too excited? Had Mayu never considered the possibility that 5 cm per second might explode in popularity over the next few weeks, perhaps even knocking her down to 2nd place? Rei couldn't help letting out a small laugh. Ha! I was being narrow-minded. It wasn't about dethroning her. It was simply that, when someone is genuinely happy, friends should smile and celebrate with them. That was all. Time continued its steady march, and another week quietly slipped by. June 20th, Wednesday. The second chapter of 5 cm per second was released with the newest issue of Sakura Iroh Weekly. Chapter 15, Sadness and Achievement. Early Wednesday morning, bookstores across the city stocked the newest issue of Sakura Iroh Weekly. Most people were already at work or school at that hour, but there were always a few who drifted between internet cafes and bookstores with no fixed schedule. Rina was one of them. June had arrived, and universities around Tokyo were gradually starting summer break. Seniors were preparing to enter the workforce. But Rina still hadn't found a job. Her family was well off, though, so she wasn't panicking. Most of her days were spent indulging in manga, hopping between bookstores and cafes with whatever new magazine caught her attention. A quick online search told her that this week's Sakura Iroh Weekly had returned to an older style cover, a collage of character portraits from every currently serialized manga. Youthful. Warm. Bright. But the top-ranking manga featured on the cover didn't interest her. She paid for the issue quickly and headed to a nearby cafe, choosing a seat by the window. The first thing she turned to was the page number for 5 cm per second. Just as some people fall in love at first sight, her connection with this manga had been instant. The first chapter had been slow and melancholic, nothing like the sweet, fluttery shoujo romances she usually read. And yet, I love it. Maybe it was because she had once known a boy like Takaki, back in junior high. She couldn't even remember his face clearly anymore. But knowing that such a person had once been a part of her life was enough to fill her with a small warmth. Smiling faintly, Rina opened the second chapter. The story picked up exactly where the first chapter had ended. Takaki had waited for hours at a transfer station on a freezing winter night. By the time the connecting train finally arrived at 8 p.m., he was already an hour late for his promised meeting with Akari, which was supposed to be at 7. His face, drawn in stark black and white, was filled with confusion, anxiety, and anguish. It was their first reunion in a year. And soon, once Takaki moved, the distance separating them would grow into something terrifying, thousands of kilometers. If they couldn't meet tonight, their last meeting might remain the graduation ceremony. Just one look at Takaki's expression made Rina feel a tight ache in her chest. How could two middle schoolers possibly fight against the decisions of their families? How unfair! I didn't make it in time. Akari must be so anxious. But that night, when she called to tell me she was transferring, she needed comfort far more than I did, and I didn't say a single kind word. I feel ashamed. Panel by panel, the ticking of a clock kept appearing. Time passed. 8 o'clock. 9 o'clock. The train had finally moved again. Only to stop in the middle of a snowy wilderness. Repetitive delays. Endless cold. Takaki remembered Akari's letters from the past year. For some reason, Akari always sounded so alone in her letters. The train didn't move for 2 hours. Takaki sat with his head lowered, his heart cracking open, tears pooling in his eyes. And then... Akari. I wish you were home. The line pierced Rina's heart. She took a slow, shaky breath. In Akari's position, she would have been terrified, wondering whether he had left early, whether he had decided the weather was too dangerous. Or worse, whether she meant so little to him that he'd simply given up. And yet... there was still a sliver of hope. Rina turned the page. Takaki stepped off the train. The station was buried in layers of snow. It was past midnight. He's way too late. There's no way she's still there. Rina whispered, fists clenched. If she had been waiting, she would have gone home long ago. How could anyone endure from 7 p.m. into the freezing early hours of the morning? But Takaki pushed open the waiting room door. His eyes widened. And Rina froze. Sitting alone in the silent, empty waiting room was Akari. Her head lowered. Her posture small and fragile. A girl who had waited through the freezing night without moving. Tears instantly filled Rina's eyes. Without a single line of dialogue, she understood. Akari must have felt abandoned. She must have thought she'd been stood up. But she stayed anyway, because she knew, if she left that station, she would never see Takaki again. Once he moved far away, they would have no next time. Was this what love looked like? Rina Morikawa's mind raced, but her eyes stayed fixed on the manga pages. She watched Takaki walk gently toward Akari. The moment the girl noticed him, her calm expression crumbled, sadness and relief flooding in all at once. Silently, she grabbed the sleeve of his coat, holding on desperately as tears slid down her pale fingers. Before she even noticed it, Rina's eyes had already turned red. The immersion was overwhelming. In the quiet waiting room, the two spoke softly about their lives over the past year. Then they stepped out together into the snowy night, walking side by side through the deserted streets. They arrived at the cherry blossom tree Akari had mentioned in her letters. But in the middle of winter, no blossoms were falling. Hey, doesn't it look like it's snowing? Akari reached out her hand, letting the snowflakes slip through her fingers. It echoed the scene from Chapter 1, what she had said a year ago. I hope we can see the cherry blossoms together next year. No blossoms. But the snow made the same soft sound of petals drifting down. The two scenes mirrored each other. Under the winter sky, Takaki and Akari looked at each other quietly. For a moment, it felt like they had returned to a year ago. The falling snow turned into cherry blossoms in their eyes. The barren trees seemed to bloom for them alone. And then, softly, tenderly, they leaned in and shared a kiss beneath the tree. Rina stared at the panel with a swirl of emotions. It should have been sweet. A beautiful, heartwarming moment. But instead, her chest tightened. Because she understood the truth beneath the surface. Everything tonight existed only for tonight. Tonight's kiss, tonight's conversation, tonight's embrace, all of it would vanish with the dawn. Tomorrow, Takaki would return home, then move with his family to a town thousands of kilometers away. The more deeply they cared for each other now, the more painful the parting would be. It was like a dream that would end as soon as morning came. When we kissed, I felt we understood everything between us. But the next moment, an unbearable sadness washed over me. I knew we could not stay together forever. Distance, time, and life itself stood in our way. In the cold winter night, they embraced. Dawn brought the moment of parting. Akari stood at the train door, watching Takaki, offering him gentle words of blessing. Takaki promised they would continue writing letters and stay connected. Then Akari pulled out an envelope from inside her coat, a letter addressed to Takaki. Unopened. Her expression was filled with sorrow as she watched the train pull away. No, no way. Rina panicked. Scenes like this were always precursors to tragedy. Why hadn't Akari given him the letter? Suddenly, Rina remembered the letter Takaki had lost in the snow back in Chapter 1. He had never managed to express his deepest feelings to Akari. And now Akari was holding onto a letter she couldn't give. Rina flipped the page, and froze at the words. End of Chapter 2. One letter lost. One letter never sent. What kind of plot is this? Why make Takaki lose his letter? Why make Akari hold hers back? Was the author hinting that these two, because they couldn't express themselves, would end in quiet tragedy? Then she realized something. This was exactly how most relationships fall apart in real life. People know certain words must be said. They know silence will only widen the distance. But they still hesitate. Still avoid. Still stay silent. And then everything breaks. Rina took several deep breaths, forcing herself to calm down. She reread Chapter 2 from the beginning. She had only one thought. What will happen in Chapter 3? Where would Akari and Takaki go from here? Would they ever meet again? Could their long-distance bond survive? Question after question filled her mind. Meanwhile, across Japan, countless readers had already finished the new chapter. Chapters 1 and 2 formed the first complete arc of 5 cm per second, the Cherry Blossom chapter. A story of two middle schoolers, and the fragile, heart-wrenching bond between them. Last week, readers felt only a subtle melancholy. But after this week, the arc's full emotional weight finally landed. Many manga readers had already sensed that something was unusual. On the official Sakura Iroh weekly forum, discussions about 5 cm per second had exploded far beyond last week's volume. Sakura drop _77, I cried in Chapter 2, when Akari was sitting alone in that freezing waiting room, OMG. UME_KO, this is love. Real love. Stray Cat 14, Takaki is kinda weak though. Night Train 00, weak? Man traveled hundreds of kilometers alone at 13. What do you want, Rebellion Arc? Shizuku_melt, long distance romance equals instant tragedy. Momo Mint, brew they didn't even have smartphones, pain speed runs. Rinrin_heart, I'm crying at lunch and someone help. Mirai_Sayoko, this hit too close. I had a friend like that in junior high, then we moved. I still wonder what he's doing now. Tomato_splash, yeah this is definitely going tragic. Haruka_yo, something is off. Why didn't Akari give him the letter? Petal Storm, Shirogane-sensei, if you're here, please listen. Make it sweeter later, I am begging. Uzuki_panic, it's literally Chapter 2 y'all calm down. If you don't like it, don't read. Natsu Milk Tea, no. We like it. We just want them happy. Ghost line, anyone know who Shirogane-sensei really is? Blue_Sakana, rumor says Shirogane-sensei is a high school student. Shiger_Momo, impossible. A high schooler can't write emotional pacing this sharp. Kurika X, best romance manga this year hands down. Voting for 5cm/s first. Hana_Ichigo, Sakura Iroh weekly usually goes for hopeful endings. Maybe there's still a twist coming? REI_Station 29, what if they stay in touch for years, promise to reach the same university, and finally reunite later? Could be a wholesome ending? Chiffon Sky, wait, that sounds cute. I'd read that. The discussion only grew more heated, and at the same time, fans across the entire distribution region began voting for 5 cm per second through their mobile phones. Inside Hojimori Publishing Group, the Sakura Iroh weekly editorial team monitored the internal data continuously. Everyone noticed the spike. It feels unexpected, Misaki murmured, her eyes thoughtful. She was genuinely beginning to anticipate the results. No one could predict how high 5 cm per second might rise in the rankings. But the fact that it ignited such a massive wave of discussion by only its second week was proof enough. This manga had serious potential. Normally, new series peaked in their first week thanks to heavy promotion. Week 2 always dropped. But judging from the momentum, 5 centimeters per second looked like it would rise instead. Regardless of the final number, 5 centimeters per second will most likely overtake Love Like Fireworks. Misaki glanced meaningfully at Takeda Jun. His brows were tightly furrowed. He had seen the signs too. The oppressive, melancholic style he'd assumed readers would reject, was not being rejected at all. On the contrary, while the forum was filled with complaints and emotional outbursts, many readers still ended up voting for 5 centimeters per second. People really were contradictory like that. Takeda felt increasingly uneasy. He looked up from his computer and accidentally met Misaki's eyes. The faint, satisfied smile on her face made his heart tighten. No way. Could Yeto's Love Like Fireworks actually lose to a newcomer's manga? And not just any newcomer, a high schooler? First Saki, now this Shirogane. Saki becoming the #1 voted author in Sakura Iro Weekly while still in high school was already unbelievable. But now another high schooler? And this one felt even more frightening. Why were all the prodigy manga artists appearing under Misaki's wing? June wanted to curse out loud. Just give me one prodigy. Just one. Why does she get all of them? The next morning, after a sleepless night of frustration, June arrived at the office early and immediately received the latest fan voting data from the statistics department. And the numbers only made his stomach twist harder. Meanwhile, time continued moving as usual for Rei Kirishima. Attending classes, sketching during breaks, hurrying home after school, Rei had no idea how much emotional chaos Chapter 2 of 5 centimeters per second had stirred among romance-loving readers throughout Tokyo and the surrounding regions. Nor did he know that several manga reviewers across Japan had started paying close attention to his work. However, at lunchtime, Rei finally received an update from the ever-well-informed Mayu. And the news shocked him. The second chapter of 5 centimeters per second had risen from last week's rank of 9th to 6th place. Meanwhile, Love Like Fireworks, which had been 6th last week, dropped to 8th.
Thanks for listening.